This video is going to be about basic fermentation. Fermentation, we know, is an anaerobic process. And we also know that fermentation happens by organisms that only do fermentation, and there are also organisms like humans that sometimes do fermentation, whereas other times they'll do aerobic respiration. There are two types of fermentation, but first I'm going to talk about the main process of fermentation is actually glycolysis. Okay, glycolysis is anaerobic. You don't use oxygen in it. And so basically all organisms do glycolysis. That is sort of a frequent test question. Also, similarly, a lot of scientists believe glycolysis evolved first simply because it exists in all organisms and both aerobic and anaerobic processes, not just aerobic respiration. And you'll remember from the cellular respiration video, in glycolysis you take glucose, our 6-carbon molecule, and turn it into 2 pyruvate molecules, each with 3 carbons. We don't lose any carbons. We're not really going to be counting carbons here. We also know that we use 2 ATP. Okay, to get to ADP. So we use 2 ATP at the beginning, but we gain 4 ATP at the end for a net gain of 2 ATP. And we also create, during glycolysis, NADH molecules from NAD+. And this is actually going to be these 4 ATP for a net of 2 ATP. Those are the only ATP you end up making during fermentation. So you wonder, well, why do anything else? And the reason we need to do something else is because glycolysis can't happen unless we can regenerate NADH. We need NADH to give up its electrons and go back to NAD+, or else we won't be able to do glycolysis anymore. Eventually we'll run out of NAD+ that aren't carrying any electrons. So we need a way to turn NADH back into NAD+, and that's where fermentation comes in. And I'm just going to sort of do this branching effect to talk about the 2 different types of fermentation, but you should know that a given organism only does one of these. It doesn't decide which one it wants to do, it just does one. One version is going to be lactic acid fermentation, in which case those pyruvate end up turning into lactic acid. Okay, you don't need to know any more about the processes, just know that NADH does use up its electrons and become NAD+, and we end up getting lactic acid as a byproduct. The other form of fermentation that we're going to discuss is alcoholic fermentation, in which case we end up getting ethanol and carbon dioxide as a gas. Okay, and same thing, you don't need to know anything else that's made. All you need to know is that NADH is used for both of these. Why don't I do this here? NADH is used and we make NAD+. Okay, So NADH is used and NAD plus is created. That way we can go back to the beginning and do glycolysis over again. Notice again, no more ATP is made. Notice that no oxygen is required at all. Let's just talk about the organisms here. Humans, when they do fermentation, when we do fermentation for that matter, we do lactic acid fermentation. And we do fermentation when you are exercising or moving your body so much that your body needs more energy, then you can actually get into your body in terms of like how much oxygen you can bring to your cells to do aerobic respiration. So there's a lack of oxygen. We need more oxygen, but we need more energy. And so we're running out of available oxygen, so we will do fermentation instead, just to get extra bits of energy. And lactic acid fermentation, if you are an athlete, is the reason why that buildup of lactic acid is the reason why your muscles can be a little bit sore after a really hard or long workout. It's because you ran out of oxygen. Your body couldn't bring in oxygen fast enough to make the ATP that you needed. And you end up getting this buildup of lactic acid, which later your body breaks down and can result in some soreness. Alcoholic fermentation is done by yeast, for example, obviously used to make things like alcohol, wine, beer, and things like that. However, you use yeast in baked goods as well. So I've made bread before and I'll put in baker's yeast. And that yeast is, fermentation is the reason why you get like little holes in bread. It's because the carbon dioxide gas is produced and those gas bubbles are locked into the bread. So again, very interesting, all about fermentation and glycolysis.